Congressman Cummings, Congressman Connolly, and guests. I am Supervisor Frank Principe. Welcome to the Woodbridge Magisterial District here at Belmont Bay, and I'm pleased to be here to share my firsthand experiences and suggestions for needed election reforms to the committee for your consideration. I want to begin by thanking you for your leadership in addressing the barriers my constituents faced here in Woodbridge on Election Day. As you know, Election Day is our greatest expression of American democracy. Not only are we among the fastest growing communities in the region, our growth is very unique. With 414,000 residents in Prince William, we are the only majority-minority jurisdiction in Northern Virginia. At the time of the election, we had over 254,000 registered voters in 76 voting precincts. On Election Day, 181,000 voters cast their ballot, representing an amazing 71% voter turnout. In my travels from precinct to precinct that day, I was truly inspired by the very patient yet determined citizens waiting in long lines in freezing temperatures to cast their ballot. I was also inspired by all of the hardworking poll workers that came out that day to assist their neighbors. Their public service does not go unnoticed. I will never forget just how remarkable it was to see so many of my neighbors who came out to vote that day and help each other express their choice for president and the other elected officials on the ballot. It was a very proud moment for all of us. My own personal experiences on Election Day mirrored those of my neighbors. I waited over 2 hours in line to cast my ballot after circling the parking lot many, many times to find an available parking space. And like others, I stood in line wondering what had occurred to cause these delays. Inside the school I was standing in, there was no cellular phone coverage, no place to sit, and I couldn't call 911 if a life depended on it. For literally thousands of other residents in my district, the waiting lines at their precincts were actually longer than mine, parking even more scarce. At 3 of 9 precincts in Woodbridge, River Oaks, Lynn, and Freedom, voters waited 3, 4, and 5 hours to cast their ballots. To make matters worse, many voters stood outside in freezing temperatures. The line at the River Oaks precinct was never less than 3 hours long, from 6 a.m. when the polls opened to 7 p.m. when the polls closed. I personally witnessed nearly 1,000 voters in line at River Oaks that snaked up and down several school hallways and then out and around the outside of the school at one location. Voters came as they were. They were on their way to work. They were wearing their work clothes, many of them suit and ties, some with kids, not expecting to have to wait that long. Disabled and seniors did not have a place to sit and rest during the wait. The roughly 5,000 registered voters in the River Oaks precincts were voting on 6 electronic voting machines. Throughout the day, there were empty voting machines as poll workers struggled to keep up with the new state laws requiring voters to show a form of identification in Virginia. The last ballot was cast at the River Oaks precinct at 10:45 p.m. that evening, meaning that the final voter waited at least 3 hours and 45 minutes to do so. What we all experience on Election Day is unacceptable. Residents in eastern Prince William County already face one of the longest commutes in the nation. And asking my neighbors, my constituents, to essentially give up a day's work, to give up their day to cast their ballot is just unacceptable. And as a county and as a nation, we can do better than this. In addition to having too few voting machines and too few electronic poll books, there were also 2 state constitutional amendments, chock full of legalese that only a constitutional lawyer could understand, that contributed to the long waits. New state identification requirements only confused voters more and added additional procedures to our poll workers to deal with. Recent census redistricting added yet another layer of confusion to the voting experience, as voters waited in line sometimes and realized too late that they were at the wrong precinct to cast their ballot. I personally witnessed voters getting out of line and going home and not casting their ballot. One frustrated gentleman looked at me on the way out the door and said, in a very high volume of voice, "This place is out of control." And it was. Our right to vote on November 6th was made more difficult than it had to be, and for others, made it impossible. Last November, there were far too many barriers for voters to overcome, and our great expression of democracy was put to the test. Given that Virginians go to the polls every year, voting reform is needed here and now more than ever. Here in Prince William, the Board of County Supervisors has recently acknowledged the barriers we experienced on Election Day and established a bipartisan election commission. The commission is charged with investigating all that went on leading up to and including Election Day, and to report back the lessons learned and recommendations to fix things, to ensure that we never repeat the experience of November 6 again. It seems certain that the Election Commission will have to seriously consider such reforms as the acquisition and additional voter machines, the establishment of additional polling locations, expanded absentee voting, and considerably more public education and outreach. I hope our commission also addresses the feasibility of internet voting, voting from the convenience and comfort of your home, as one option for Virginians. I believe all of these things are possible when the elected leadership at the federal, state, and local government levels all work together on this particular issue. Thank you for the opportunity to speak at the forum. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Frank. Keith Scarborough from the Electoral Board.
Thank you. Thank you, Congressman Cummings, Congressman Connolly. Is the mic working? Okay. Thank you for bringing this forum to Prince William County. Let me begin by just saying that the views that I'm expressing are my own. I'm the chairman of the Electoral Board, but they don't necessarily represent the views of my two Republican colleagues. So I'm here on behalf of the board, but they may not agree with everything that I'm going to say or recommend.
Keith, can I just interrupt you? It may be useful for those of us not from Virginia, just real briefly explain how our electoral boards work, because it sounds like you're in charge, being chairman.
Right.
But here in Virginia, that doesn't mean you're in charge.
If only that were true, Congressman. In Virginia, the State Board of Elections and the local county and city board of elections are based on the partisan breakdown of which party controls the governor's office. So since we have a Republican governor, there are 3 members of the Electoral Board. All were nominated by our political party, and then we're actually appointed by the circuit court. The party that controls the governor has 2 slots, and the other party has 1. So we have a Republican governor, so right now we have 2 Republican members of the Electoral Board. The secretary and the chairman have to be of opposite parties. So I'm the chairman, even though I'm the minority member of the board, and we have 2 Republican members. And the State Board of Elections operates in very much the same way. So to paraphrase Charles Dickens, last year's election was the best of times and the worst of times. As a partisan Democrat, I was very happy with the results here, Virginia, nationally, but as an election official and as a chairman of the Electoral Board, I was very unsatisfied and frustrated by the fact that we had long lines at so many precincts. And it's as Delegate Torian and Mr. Principe mentioned, it's really a testament to the dedication of the voters who were willing to wait in line to cast their vote. Now, this was not a uniform experience across Prince William. We had several precincts that actually closed on time at 7 o'clock with no voters waiting in line. Then we had probably the majority of our precincts had people still waiting at 7 o'clock. And in some cases, it took them an hour, 2 hours, maybe longer to process all of those voters. And then the worst case was as been mentioned, River Oaks, where the last person didn't vote until approximately 10:45. Now, I had visited River Oaks during the day and saw the long lines. Fortunately, we had an experienced crew of election officials. We only had 6 voting machines, but all 6 were voting, and we had 4 electronic poll books checking people in. Even that didn't address the long lines that we experienced. But the lines were really unprecedented. Even in the 2008 election, where we had actually a higher percentage turnout, 75%, we experienced lines during the day at precincts but there was not a single precinct in 2008 that did not close on time at 7 o'clock, and we had no voters waiting in line at 7 in 2008. Now, these delays were unacceptable to us as election officials, and we received complaints from voters, from elected officials throughout the county, both Democratic officials like Mr. Principe and Republicans. And the Electoral Board, the General Registrar, and her staff are committed to doing everything we can to make sure that we don't repeat this experience in future elections. And I also want to specifically commend Supervisor Principe for pushing the concept of this commission or citizens task force. What we learn is, as election officials, we become sort of insulated about what goes on outside the precinct. And so we look forward to their recommendations about changes we can make. Now, in my view, there were several things that combined to create these long lines that we had. Several of these, Mr. Principe already mentioned. This was the first presidential election since redistricting. And the Board of County Supervisors redrew a lot of the precinct lines. We added a number of new precincts to the county. Well, as most of you know, there are a high number of people who vote in presidential elections who never show up again until the next 4 years. So we had a number of people who showed up at the precinct they voted in last, only to learn they had to go somewhere else. Again, as Mr. Principe mentioned, there were 2 state constitutional amendments on the ballot. And the political parties, the election officials, we did everything we could to educate voters to know about these amendments, but the vast majority didn't even know they were on the ballot until they got the voting machine, and then they're trying to read and understand these. So one of the proposals, one of the things we've done is we're urging our members of the General Assembly, don't put constitutional amendments on the ballot in a high turnout presidential year. We have elections every year in Virginia, so pick one of those other 3 years to do amendments. One other factor, even though we have elections every year in Virginia, we have a number of infrequent voters. So there were a number of voters who showed up to the precincts last November who had a question mark next to their name on the poll book. And that question mark is there because the State Board of Elections had some indication that this voter had moved since they last voted or registered, based on change of address forms. So when that voter shows up, we have to verify that he or she is still registered, still lives in that precinct, in order to determine whether they can vote. In some cases, we had people who had moved 2 or 3 times since the last time that they had voted. And so all of these complications slow down the process of checking in voters. But in my view, the most serious reason why we had such long lines was we didn't have enough voting machines and electronic poll books and election officers. The state has a minimum code that Delegate Torian mentioned. Basically, the law requires us to provide 1 voting machine for every 750 registered voters in a precinct. And in the past, that's never been a problem because we had relatively low turnout, and so we'd never experienced long lines like we had this year. Now, each county makes its own determinations about what kind of equipment to use. And the Board of County Supervisors here in 2003 voted to purchase these DRE electronic voting machines. So that's the only form of equipment we have available in our precinct. There are other counties and cities, such as Fairfax, where they also have scanning devices, so the voter has the option of doing a paper ballot. But we don't have that choice in Prince William County. And we can only use paper ballots if all the machines go down in a precinct. Now, to further complicate into matters, in 2007, the General Assembly voted to prohibit us from purchasing any more of these DRE machines. So Prince William, any of the other counties or cities can no longer buy these new DRE machines. So basically, Since 2003, we've had a fixed finite number of machines, and we've been prohibited from actually buying any more. Well, as you all know, Prince William County has grown since 2003. We've added a number of new precincts since 2003. So basically what happened is, the numbers caught up with us last November, and we did not have enough machines for all the precincts. So what we've done, the task force is working. The electoral board and the registrar are committed to having a new generation of voting machines in place by 2016. What that means is the Board of County Supervisors and the General Assembly are going to have to provide resources to buy these new machines. So those were some of the things that happened on Election Day. It was a very frustrating day because I've been on the electoral board now since 2007, and we always have issues and challenges during the day, but this was really the most frustrating. And finally, let me just make a plug for Congressman Connolly's FAST bill, and this is an area where my Republican
take your time, Keith.
This is an area where my Republican colleagues and I don't necessarily agree. I fully support no excuse early voting. I worked at the DMV the last Saturday before the election, and another reason why we had even fewer machines, we added an additional in-person absentee location, which took those machines out of commission for Election Day. And there are a number of election officers here in the audience who worked absentee in person. And I know we had to turn away a significant number of people who were there, wanted to vote, but they didn't meet Virginia's rigid definition of how you qualify to meet absentee. So, no excuse early voting is clearly something that would help reduce the lines on Election Day.
Thank you, Keith.